My name is Dr. Greg, and we will be talking about fitness and multiomics. And so, as I mentioned, I'm Dr. Greg. I'm a naturopathic doctor and a PhD in genetics. I'm a precision health consultant and clinical success manager at Ethereum. And my goal is to combine natural medicine with omics technologies, ultimately to improve precision and personalization of medicine. So today I'll be covering what is multiomics, what is fitness within the context of a multiomics visit, looking at activity as well. And then we'll cover the different ohms and how they're implicated with fitness and metabolomics, microbiomics, and genomics. And then I'll leave us with some takeaways as well. And so we'll tell you this multiomics. So multiomics is looking at the different ohms and finding associations between them. So we have our genome, which is our entire collection of genes. There's the transcriptomes, which is the active process of genes being converted into RNA, which then will be converted to protein. So the study of that is the proteome. There's the metabolome, which are metabolites, and then there's the microbiome, which is all our microbes. And so multiomics is essentially looking at the connection between them. And this is a hot area of research. Genomics, just because it started earlier on, there's just been a ton of research. And I do see that it's kind of peaking a little bit. What is now starting to garner more interest is looking at the microbiome, certainly, and the metabolome. But the multiomics is just essentially taking off, especially since 2016. There's a lot of research in looking at that. So how does exercise fit in with multiomics? And so different types of exercise can have different impacts on various omics areas. So when you look at genetics and exercise, it could elucidate different things such as injury risk or exercise preference. When you look at metabolomics, you can look at metabolite changes from different types of exercises, perhaps identifying if you're over or under exercising, which is associated with some things which I'll discuss. And looking at the microbiome, we could see how that's shifting in response to different exercises. And so are we having favorable shifts or unfavorable shifts? How is the microbiome shifting in one individual versus another in response to certain exercises? So there's a lot of different information we could glean from. And so two big things. I like to distinguish this in patient visits because sometimes I'll ask people, are you exercising? And they're like, yes. And I say, what was your exercise? And they say, well, I parked my car further from the store and I walked a little bit further. And I like to make the distinguishment that exercise is different from physical activity. So if you're taking steps instead of an elevator, you're walking a little bit further, that is physical activity. That is good, but not necessarily exercise. Exercise is planned, structured, repetitive movements to improve health. And there's benefits to those that supersede that of just being physically active. And so I like to distinguish those two. Both have their own health benefits. Exercise has many notable health benefits. Within a clinical context, the way you assess this, and I like to try to assess this, especially for new visits, is are you exercising? If so, how often? What are you doing? What kinds of exercise? At what intensity level? Oftentimes, you'll have people that they're not exercising, and there's usually history to that. Usually there's injuries. And the types of injuries will also give you some information regarding their previous health history. So it's good to know that type of information. And then physical activity, you have to ask questions like, what is the profession? Are they sitting a lot? Do they get to move during their workday? What does their typical work week look like? Do they have an ergonomic workplace setup? Sometimes the way they're sitting or a lot of time in a certain position will predispose them for injury. So this is some information that you want to take into account. There's lots of different types of exercise. So I think I try not to be too idealistic in terms of they need to be doing a certain type of exercise. Granted, some exercises are more aerobic in nature, meaning that they are consuming oxygen, and some are more anaerobic in that they're more glycolysis driven. And so we have endurance training, which can include a lot of different things, triathlon, hiking, Nordic walking, which I didn't even know what this was until I saw this, but it's essentially walking with like poles, which is apparently associated with a 40% increase in calorie burning compared to just regular walking, which is interesting. Strength training, fitness, karate, boxing, different types of sports, ball sports, especially coordinating and flexibility, lots of different things there, yoga, Pilates. I know there's extreme Pilates now, which is apparently garnering a lot of interest. Mind-body stuff, I mean, this is still a type of activity or even exercise, depending on how you do it, and in the context of which you do it, like hot yoga and whatnot. And then we have just regular activities, cleaning, walking, and then some other sport things. So lots of different types of exercise and activity that people can do. Other than genetic predispositions, other omic impacts, lots of different things can impact exercise. So training, how is somebody recovering? How has been their sleep? What is their psyche like? What is the environment of which they're working out? Do they have a coach that can impact exercise? What is their level of motivation? What equipment do they have? So this is some things depending on how involved you want to get in with a patient. You could assess these things. I find that if somebody is really stuck and they're not really able to start an exercise routine, it may be worth it just to kind of go over some of these information just to get more details regarding that. So what are the benefits of exercise? They are numerous. Lots of different things can help. They can help with cognitive improvements, memory and learning, cardiorespiratory fitness, improved metabolism, helps with the immune system, helps with the gut, helps with obviously muscle mass and strength, muscle mass and or strength. And so lots of different benefits from exercise, and I'll be going into more details about that. One thing to know, and this will impact our metabolome, is that some muscle fibers are more slow, they're fast, and then they're very fast. And these slow twitch muscle fibers are more aerobic in nature. They have a higher mitochondrial density. They have a lower glycolytic capacity because they're going to be more oxidative, and they like to use triglycerides. Versus our fast twitch are going to be more glycolytic, and especially the fastest ones are going to be more low oxidative. So they're really going to like to use sugar and carbs as a fuel source. Subsequently, the major fuel storage for these fast twitch ones are glycogen, and the contraction time is going to vary between these. The very fast glycolytic ones, they're going to be contracting more quickly, though they will be much more quicker to fatigue compared to the slow twitch ones, which will have a more higher resistance to fatigue. So essentially, the more aerobic, the more slow, the more anaerobic, the more fast. And based upon this, you'll see changes on the metabolome based on these types of muscle fibers, whether they're slow twitch or fast twitch. In general, when you look at some metabolite changes that will occur with exercise on the microbiome or metabolome, you'll see increases in lactic acid, pyruvate, and glucose on the liver, especially because it's breaking down the glycogen. You will see in muscle, lactic acid will increase, pyruvate will increase, glucose and fatty acids. Essentially, the muscle is becoming more metabolically active. In the blood, you'll see some substances increase, such as alanine, lactic acid, pyruvate, and fatty acids. And then you're going to see more fatty acids being liberated from our fat tissue stores just to help increase fat as a fuel source for our muscles. If our muscles are inflamed, it's going to affect our muscle metabolism, and especially a Western type diet is going to increase the inflammation in our muscle. So especially being obese, these fat cells are going to be more pro-inflammatory in nature, and it's just going to lead to a more metabolically challenged environment in our muscle cells. And so it's going to increase inflammation in the muscle. It's going to decrease repair in the muscle, going to increase fibrosis, going to increase insulin resistance, which isn't good because you want glucose to be able to get into our fat cells and act as a fuel. And if that's not happening properly, it's going to lead to, well, less inclination to exercise because these people are going to be super tired, but it's going to impair that whole process. So inflammation is important when it comes to the context of exercise. Yes, there's a bit of a hormetic stress where our muscles will get a little bit inflamed from a workout, but you don't want to be walking around with a ton of inflammation all the time. It's just going to impair your muscle strength and your gains, if that's what somebody is shooting for. There is oxidative stress as well that happens from exercise. I think people that aren't aware of this, I think they underplay it, but I do think people that are aware of this, I think they freak out about reactive oxygen species and antioxidants. I don't want to take vitamin C. I don't want to take any antioxidants around my workout. I'm afraid I'm going to blunt the oxidative effects of exercise. It's a bell curve. So you don't want it to be too low, but you don't want it to be too high. And so if you want a hormetic effect from exercise, you want kind of that porridge effect, just right temperature. Some reactive oxygen species, which will then upregulate our own antioxidant response enzymes, leading to some oxidative damage, but then repair. If you do it too much, ROS is going to be too high, antioxidants is going to be too low, and you're going to have too oxidative damage. And so you don't want to over or underdo it. Just not just from the ROS perspective, but just other health concerns. This study was looking at the prevalence of upper respiratory tract infections, gastrointestinal issues, inflammation from people that are exercising, and this is like a reverse bell curve, essentially. So if you're sedentary, obviously there's going to be a higher risk of these because exercise will be protecting of those. But if you exercise more, it's going to decrease your risk. However, if you're super athletic, you're exercising all the time, and you're just burning both ends of the candle there, so to speak, you're going to be at an increased risk compared to if you were just sedentary at all. Definitely not worth it to overdo it. There's ways to mitigate this risk, just to make sure you're still healthy as you're pushing yourself, but still, in general, pushing it a bit is going to be not good just for overall health. So looking at different types of exercise and how it will impact the metabolome, we will see specific changes. For example, with in skeletal muscle, you're going to see a decrease in branched chain amino acids and tryptophan. You're going to see an increase in TCA cycle metabolites, protein degradation, biosynthesis of amino acids in the muscle itself. In the liver, you're going to see a decrease in glucose and glycogen-derived metabolites, but then you're also going to see increased biosynthesis of amino acids, specifically glycine, serine, threonine, You're going to see an increase in urea cycle metabolites as well. In the bone, you're going to see a decrease in bone resorption metabolites, especially decrease over long term. But then you will see an increase in formation of bone metabolites. And in our fat cells or adipocytes, you're going to see an increase by synthesis of amino acids and glucose uptake. That was strength training in response to aerobic exercise. Some differences, nothing major, but you're going to see a decrease in fatty acids and skeletal muscle, decrease in BCAAs and tryptophan, increase in some of the same ones, but especially because aerobics exercise, it's going to be using fats as a fuel source more. So you're going to see an increase in these acylcarnitines, which help with fatty acid oxidation. In the liver, decrease lipid metabolites, decrease glucose and glycogen around metabolites, increase biosynthesis of amino acids like the other one. But again, there's this acylcarnitine turnover. And adipocytes, especially because you're fat burning, you're going to be uptaking less fat into the muscle cells, and then you're going to have an increase in biosynthesis of unsaturated fatty acids and amino acids in the adipocytes. So you can look at metabolites not just in the blood, but in other different types of sample. And so in the plasma, it's going to look a little bit different from some of the other samples. So in the plasma, sphingomyelins, glycerophospholipids, lots of different lipid type of compounds are going to be altered in response to exercise. Lysophospholipids, phosphatidylcholines, acylcarnitines, again, big one we see change. Indole lactic acid, this is a very beneficial compound which decreases the risk of many different diseases. You'll see this increase. Proline will decrease. In adipose tissue, as I mentioned, increase in amino acids will happen. In the stool, you're going to see a decrease in acylcarnitines, decrease in peptides, decrease in amino acid derivatives. So perhaps the body doesn't want to eliminate these things. That's why they're decreasing. In the urine, you're going to see some changes as well. And it depends on what you're measuring. Different types of studies that have looked at metabolite changes, they're looking at other parameters of exercise, such as VO2 max, what their blood glucose is, so other markers, and they're looking at other parameters such as waist circumference, how's that shifting in response to metabolite changes. Ultimately, these things are beneficial. You're going to see decreases in insulin resistance, improved glucose homeostasis, improved lipid metabolism. So ultimately, in totality, these metabolites are beneficial. I really like this slide in particular. This looks at some pretty unique metabolites in their implication with exercise and where they're acting and then what their mechanisms are. So this 12-13 dihome induces thermogenesis in brown adipose tissue. This one, BIBA, increases dihome in the muscle is going to increase fatty acid uptake and oxidation. Arginine alpha-ketoglutarate, or excuse me, that's just alpha-ketoglutarate, will induce muscle hypertrophy. And then BIBA will suppress inflammation under conditions of being obese, which is interesting. All of these compounds, BIBA, dihome, lactate, chironic acid, will all increase tissue browning, so making them more mitochondrial dense to do thermogenesis. In the brain, chironic acid is going to decrease depression. Lactate is going to have an impact on memory, and some of these other metabolites will promote hippocampal neurogenesis. This is why exercising helps increase our memory, just one of the other benefits of it. BIBA, I really like this one, especially as a compound that helps burn fat as a fuel, helps decrease fat mass, especially visceral adiposity. It'll increase fatty acid oxidation in the liver, and it will help ameliorate endoplasmic reticulum stress. And then also it's been associated with bone loss. You can actually supplement with this compound. I've seen this in some supplements. So this study was looking at 17 females. They were all clinically obese. Essentially, they were sedentary prior. They did an exercise intervention, and then they looked at their metabolites. And as a lead-in, they also looked at some microbiome changes. And so what they saw in terms of changes, adenosine was altered. This is one of the precursors for ATP, so that makes sense. They're just going to have higher turnover there. Caffeine, dexahexanoic acid, DHA, that was altered a little bit. Here's your phosphatidylcholines, a lot of changes there. PC as well. And then taurine as well, that was altered. These are metabolites. These are metabolites in the blood, excuse me. These are metabolites on the right these metabolites on the right were in the stool. So some of them were associated with dietary metabolites, H-hydroxy, cyclohexyl carboxylic acid. This is an indicator of different types of more meat-based eating, methylxanthine, caffeine metabolism, 3-phenyl acetic acid, 3-phenyl lactic acid. A lot of metabolites you'll see, especially if there's amino acid turnover and it's associated with adrenal output, will be metabolites of phenylalanine or tyrosine metabolism. So that's one thing we're looking at here. Alpha-linoleic acid, ALA, gamma-glutamyl, leucine, these things are lots of health implications associated with these, and we'll see that these are beneficially changed. So there's lots of changes that will be elicited from exercise, even if you're going from no exercise at all to ramping up exercise. I won't go too much into details regarding this. This is from the same study. essentially you could perform a network analysis and coordinate these. So if you have these shifts in the metabolome and these shifts in the microbiome, what's the common denominator between these metabolites and these metabolites? And so you'll see they have common denominators. Some might be associated with both lipid transport and metabolism. Some are associated with energy production and conversion. So you can make that association with some clinical parameters around fat mass and obesity, their BMI, their weight, their visceral fat. So this is where the artificial intelligence analysis comes into play to kind of analyze these networks. That's exercise. If you look at metabolite shifts in walking, I really like this study. They took old people and they ranked them based on how much they walked. People that walked more, we saw more changes in caffeine metabolism, arginine and proline metabolism, more arginine and ornithine metabolism. So some metabolites, especially with nitric oxide and vasculature, you're going to see changes in that. Nicotinate, nicotinamide metabolism, so NAD, phenylalanine, there's those adrenal-like metabolites that are altered. So even just walking, you're going to see changes in the metabolome based on how much somebody walks. And especially over I feel like last year, a lot of people were talking about more steps, at least getting 10,000 steps per day. Essentially, the more steps, the longer you'll live, essentially. It seems like every study adds more steps and then increases the life range. But anyway, walking is associated with different metabolome changes. So, okay, some takeaways from the metabolomics and exercise. Looking at metabolic pathways, we can elucidate different responses to exercise. Different types of exercise have their own unique metabolic profile. Some findings are more uniform in the metabolome across various types of exercise. We can see beneficial changes on metabolites associated with serotonin production, arginine metabolism, phosphatidylcholine, or just cholines in general, fatty acid oxidation. And my personal favorite one is BIBA, just because it seems like it's one of the more powerful metabolites that seems to be secreted from muscles in response to exercise. Exercise in the microbiome. So different types of exercises have been associated with different microbiome changes. In general, exercise is associated with increases in beneficial microbes and gut metabolites. As a general rule, resistance training seems to be less impactful on our microbiome. Aerobic exercise seems to have a greater impact. If you want the biggest quote unquote bang for your buck, doing both is going to have the greatest just overall change. Probably not in just the microbiome, but just the overall metabolome and microbiome. HIIT has some powerful changes as well in the microbiome and metabolome, but combining aerobic and anaerobic exercise is really profound. Overexercising too much can lead to overactivation of the HPA axis, resulting in gut dysfunction. So overdoing it is actually also not beneficial. What is going on that is eliciting these effects? And so from exercise, we're increasing butyrate-producing bacteria, subsequently increasing butyrate, which could, in theory, improve our gut barrier. We're decreasing bacterial translocation, decreasing pro-inflammatory cytokines, and we are going to be from these, we're going to be decreasing gut condition risks, so decrease colon cancer risk, decrease inflammatory bowel disease, diverticulitis. In brain, we're going to be increasing BDNF. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Increasing our blood-brain barrier function, decreasing our risk of depression and anxiety. In our muscle and adipose tissue, we're going to increase insulin sensitivity, increase energy expenditure, and decrease inflammation, as well as having some other beneficial effects on other organisms. Not that if you overdo it is not good, but if you go from being inactive to having light activity to moderate activity to intense activity, there's essentially a stepwise improvement in our microbiome in terms of bacterial diversity and short-chain fatty acids. So the more intense, the better, assuming you're not overdoing it, your HPA axis. And so, it's one thing to keep in mind there. Not a problem to push it, just as long as your HPA axis is being overactive. But what I mean by that is you would know if you're going into super cortisol spikes, like if you or your client are exercising and they just experience a big drop in blood sugar, they get shaky, they get irritable, and they get anxious. That's HPA axis overdrive. So also making sure you're in a proper fed state to do said exercise. Like somebody who's fasted every morning and exercising, over time, those people, their adrenals are going to be very taxed. Actually, I've seen people with their adrenals taxed. So that's the type of person where you go into this overdo it territory. So in general, we'll see changes in the microbiome for different bacterial species. Periodes, there's some good strains, some bad strains. You'll see a decrease in the bad strains, decrease in proteobacteria, increase in these beneficial microbes, Prevotella, Bifido, Akkermansia, Fecali prausnitzki, Lactobacillus, Roseburia, see increase in those. Decrease LPS, which is a inflammatory compound made in the cell membrane of certain bacteria. decreased toll-like receptor 4 activation. This is pro-inflammatory. And as I mentioned, increased saturated fatty acids, nutrient absorption, ultimately having beneficial effects on the gut. This was a clinical trial. This took individuals, they had them exercise, they had them do diet, they had them do diet and exercise, and then they had them do nothing. And then they compared their outcomes in terms of gut microbiome changes. They were doing metagenomics, so they were doing whole genome sequencing of the gut microbiome, and they were looking at some other parameters of exercise as well, such as VO2 max and whatnot. So in this study, none of this is small, so I do my best to interpret this, but essentially Shannon diversity is looking essentially how diverse the microbiome is. If you exercise and diet, that had the greatest impact on Shannon diversity, but even if you were just exercising or dieting, you saw greater changes in Shannon diversity compared to if you weren't. And so we saw that there. And then they looked at if you exercised and dieted, or just exercised or dieted or did nothing, what kind of changes will we expect in our microbiome? And so we see an increase in good strains and a decrease in some of the bad strains. And so, you even saw that with just exercising, even without the diet. And so some of the good guys here, you see increase, I believe. Rosburia increased here. Let's see here. Pseudomonas decreased here. Collinsella decreased. That's a not good one. And like I said, here's the Bacteroides. There's just certain these numbers here refer to different strains of Bacteroides, which are known to be beneficial. And so you see these increase in either intervention, just diet and exercise, or just exercise. So, and here at the bottom here, this is looking at some traditional markers. We have HDL, LDL, triglycerides, AST. And this is looking at different types of bacterial strains and how they're affecting this. But in general, we can see shifts in the microbiome down to species level and strain level in response to exercise and diet, or both. So some takeaways from this: exercise elicits favorable shifts on the gut microbiome and metabolome. Gut metabolite shifts, we'll see increased short chain fatty acids and butyrate, decreased LPS, toll-like receptor 4. Within the gut microbiome, we'll see increased short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria, increased Shannon index, alpha diversity, decreased bacteria containing LPS, and increased beneficial microbes such as Akkermansia, Rosburia, and Prevotella. All right, exercise in the genome. So exercise will upregulate gene expression on a wide scale. And so if you look here, this is kind of looking at over a time period, what kind of gene expression do we see? When we first start exercising, we see stress response genes get activated. Secondarily, over a span of a half an hour to up to 4 hours, we'll see metabolic priority genes being upregulated. And then more so over the long term, we'll see metabolic mitochondrial enzyme genes being upregulated as far as 24 hours out from exercise. And so it's kind of this cascade effect that happens with gene expression. Our genetic inheritance can affect exercise preference, response, injury risk, power, strength, recovery, aerobic, anaerobic ability, just many different things that affect exercise. Our genome could have some input to. People say, all right, what genes are they? This is a map of, these are chromosomes. These are areas on chromosomes that either upregulating or downregulating in response to exercise. And as you can see, there's this whole genome effect that's happening in response to exercise. And even on the mitochondrial genome, you're going to see changes as well. So there's this whole global pattern that happens when we exercise. So it's not isolated to any particular gene or sets of genes. What health parameters will affect exercise that have genetic inferences? Lots of different things. So our genes will be implicated in things such as lung volume, muscle fiber density, blood vessel elasticity, circulating factors, our body size and composition, and all these things have inputs to our genome. So there's lots of factors to consider that would be affecting our genes' response to exercise. We can look at the Kyoto Encyclopedia of Genes and Genomes to see what genes are upregulated. What are these genes? And so, for example, we see amino acid metabolism, specifically valine, leucine, isoleucine degradation genes being activated, arginine and proline metabolism genes being activated, hydrate metabolism genes being activated, such as TCA cycle, propionate metabolism, pyruvate metabolism, energy metabolism genes, such as oxidative phosphorylation, lipid metabolism genes such as fatty acid metabolism. And we could see what genes, how many are being upregulated, how many are being downregulated, how many it's kind of in between. So, and this is just, there was actually a bunch of these pages. These are just some of the big ones that are changed. We could also look at individual genes and what they're associated with. So when we're looking at VO2 max, we look at different studies, whether it's in males, females, or both. Lots of different genes are being upregulated. Sometimes it's not genes. See, this says LOC, bunch of numbers. That's just a location within the genome. It's not even a specific gene. It's just an area of the genome that's being altered. Some of them we know, like this one, call 18A1. Anytime you see COL, that refers to a collagen producing gene. So you can see changes there. This is a sodium channel gene. and this is cardiorespiratory fitness. So different outputs, you could look and see what genes are implicated in that process. So there's lots of different genes. There's almost 20 to 25,000 genes in general, and there's billions of SNPs. So these are single changes within the genome that can occur, many of which, I mean, we all have unique SNPs in ourselves that are unidentified, and then we have many that are identified. But just to cover a couple, there is the ACTN3 gene, which is implicated in fast twitch muscle fibers. So within this gene, it stands for alpha-actinin 3. This gene product and its production is more prevalent in power athletes, which we call the RR genotype, and we see less of this ACTN3 in endurance athletes, which is this XX genotype. Studies have looked at this many different times. So whether it's males or females, when you are more endurance, you have more of this XX genotype. When you're more power, it's this RR genotype. Just for clarity, power, that would be like, so you have Olympic weightlifting, snatches, clean and jerks, any explosive movements where you're doing a lot of output in a short burst period of time, whereas endurance is kind of long running or just doing some type of not so quick movements over a longer duration of time. And what is actually happening on a molecular level? It's this association of this protein with these fast twitch muscle fibers. And so that's the big difference between these two genotypes is without the ACTN3, there's just lack of this association within the sarcomere, that is. And so that is what's altering this power output in these individuals. And this is going to change based on location as well. You'll see some prevalence for some more endurance in some countries, and then you'll see some preference for more power in others. So that's going to vary as well. This isn't just associated with muscle power and endurance. There's other things that are associated with this. For example, the R genotype is associated with a decreased fall risk, decreases risk of sarcopenia, increased bone mineral density, decreased potential in risk of developing insulin resistance, potentially lower HDL. And this RR is the power athlete type. Whereas this XX type, the more endurance people, you're going to have lower muscle mass, lower muscle function, increase in fall risk, increase in sarcopenia, decreased bone mineral density, and increased potential on insulin resistance. So some other not good things that are associated with this XX genotype. And before you feel bad about yourself, I know I'm an XX genotype, so, but I still play basketball, I still do power sports, so it's not like you can't, it's just, it's not going to come natural. I'm not a natural dunker per se, but I would like to be one day. But I'd have to overcome a genetic deficiency of this, but it's possible. So collagen is important for many different functions. There's different types of collagen. There's type 1 collagen, which is part of, or the organic part of the bone, membranes for guided tissue regeneration, implicated in skin, bone, teeth, tendons, ligaments, vasculature. There's type 2, which is part of cartilage. Type 3, part of muscle and blood vessel. Type 4, part of the basal lamina and epithelial secreted layer of the basement membrane. And there's type 5, which is in hair and cell surfaces and placenta. So there's various different types of collagen. I could barely see this, and I know you can barely either, but basically this is looking at this is COL1A1, and then there's a certain SNP in this gene that is associated with tendon injuries in individuals. These are various studies that have looked at those different genotypes. This is COL3A1. So COL1 is type 1 collagen, COL3 is type 3 collagen, this one's COL5, so this is type 5 collagen. And these are specific genes these are specific SNPs in those genes that have been associated with injury risk. People have looked at different studies looking at these individually or in combination. It seems that COL1, this particular one, this RS100 SNP, as the most associated with most injuries. And essentially this is altering the amount of collagen that is being produced in these individuals, thus predisposing them for injury risk. The remedy for this, I am a huge fan of collagen supplementation, many different types of collagen. And so dietary source of collagen, bone broth, or consuming somehow bones and joints. I think bone broth is the easiest way for that. Fish have collagen, eggs, chicken, algae has some collagen. When we're looking at individual amino acids for collagen production, glycine is 1/3 of the product of collagen. So even supplementing with glycine is important. You could test for these amino acids, by the way. It's one way to help see does your body have enough of the precursors to even make collagen. Proline is important for this, lysine, hydroxyproline, nutrients needed for proper collagen production, vitamin C, copper, zinc, vitamin E, vitamin A. How can we upregulate the expression of these genes if they're either downregulating or functioning abnormally? Exercising, This study looked at aerobic training and resistance training. Again, there's just always this trend. Aerobic exercise seems to have just a bigger effect of upregulating enzyme expression. Here's this call 1A2. We don't see that upregulated here. Here's call 5A1, which is also implicated with injuries. We don't see that expressed as much. So we see some increased upregulation, but we do see dermal thickness being increased from resistance training. So, someone might ask me this question at the end. You do aerobic or resistance training? I think both have their role. And again, fitting them within a healthy exercise routine where you're not overdoing it. So there's some things to help with collagen support. All right, so I'll try not to rush through these, but these are very important. So PGC1 alpha, this stands for peroxisome peripheral activated receptor gamma coactivator 1 alpha, but people shorten it, just called PGC1 alpha. This helps with many different things on a mitochondrial level. It's implicated with exercise. It interacts with several other proteins, FNDC5, irisin, and BDNF, and these will all be responding to exercise. PGC1 alpha, it's a transcriptional coactivator that regulates energy metabolism, mitochondrial biogenesis, and nutrient metabolism. It's going to respond to calcium flux, reactive oxygen species, insulin, thyroid, estrogen, hormones, inflammation, and ATP demands. So it's very responsive to our body's environment, and lots of things will impact all these. In particular, it's going to be responsive to exercise in skeletal and cardiac muscle, and when we exercise, we increase expression of it. And as we increase the expression of PGC1 alpha, we're going to see this interaction with FNDC5, which is going to increase BDNF, and we're going to see an increase in irisin, which is going to increase UCP2. What are all these things? I'm saying all these names. Well, I'll get to those in a second. But there are many different benefits with these. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is having an impact on our brain function. It's crucial for learning and memory, neuroprotection, synaptic plasticity. There's lots of different genetic variants that are associated with BDNF production. So this is something you could have a genetic tendency for naturally having lower levels. Some people have higher levels. If you have higher levels, you're more likely to be anxious. So it's not always like a good thing just to have more of it, but you want to have a good amount of it. UCP is uncoupling protein, basically uncouples our type of energy thermogenesis in the mitochondria. So we're making more heat. This is this brown adipose tissue. You're going to see more uncoupling protein. And irisin I'm going to talk about in a second here. We can look at different genes that are in the PGC1 alpha, and they have various different effects. With a lot of these studies with genetics, they're looking at it within the context of diseases. Is this associated with insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome? And so there are particular genetic variants where, yes, they have an increase of the disease associations, but they have these implications on exercise as well. For example, this one, reduced improvement in aerobic capacity and insulin sensitivity during exercise. And so some people, they just have less benefits because they have certain risk variants in the ability to activate this mitochondrial gene. So there's many different ones. This is looking at the PGC1 alphas. I mentioned they associate with uncoupling protein. There's several of them. There's UCP2, UCP1. And so, there's genetic risk variants in there that you could look at and see how are they affecting fasting or glucose production or their protective ability. Lots of different variants we could look at there. PGC1 alpha, as I mentioned, it will upregulate irisin, which goes into our bloodstream, can cross the blood-brain barrier, well, impacts on the brain. Lots of different benefits there. Decrease neuroinflammation, decrease neurodegeneration, oxidative stress, decrease oxidative stress, decrease mitochondrial dysfunction, and just improvements in all these different areas of the brain as well. So it's a really profound molecule, this irisin. I could keep going on about it. So how is that doing it? There's lots of different molecular mechanisms of how it's doing it. One thing, it will inhibit this STAT NF-kappa B pathway, so decrease inflammation. So this is how exercise is anti-inflammatory, especially on our brain. I notice there's a difference in people that exercise who don't in their response to stress. And oftentimes people who have a more pro-inflammatory state, a more pro-inflammatory brain, they just don't respond to stress as well. And how is that mechanism occurring? It's through these compounds, such as irisin, that are being upregulated in response to exercise and can cross into the brain and have these beneficial effects. And one of the ways it's doing this is by increasing BDNF, which has an impact on neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, neuronal survival, neuronal differentiation. So not only do they respond to stress well, people are just smarter. They have better brain function. They can remember things. They can think about things. So this is how exercise has these other profound effects. How can you increase these things? So I mentioned exercise can help upregulate these. Cold exposure, sunlight, thyroid hormones will basically increase all of these, will favorably impact PGC1 alpha, irisin, uncoupling protein, and BDNF. For PGC1 alpha, basically anything that activates mitochondria is going to increase PGC1 alpha expression. PQQ, hydroxytyrosol, resveratrol, nicotinamide riboside, EGCG, carnitine, rhodiola, fasting and caloric restriction will increase these. Or actually, they don't have a favorable effect on these things. So those will increase PGC1 alpha. Irisin, every time you contract your muscles, you can stimulate the release of irisin. Strength training and HIIT particularly will increase irisin. Vitamin D will increase it. Caffeine, PUFAs, holy basil, metformin, whole body vibration. There was a study that showed that that increases irisin. When you're doing fasting and caloric restriction, that'll actually decrease irisin levels. Uncoupling protein, fucoxanthin from seaweed. I think it's like brown algae. Really powerful uncoupling protein activator. CoQ10, green tea, caffeine, chocolate, resveratrol, berberine, another one of my favorite ones. Bioflavonoids in general will increase this uncoupling protein. If you're iron deficient, you're going to see lower uncoupling protein. And if you're doing fasting, it's going to decrease uncoupling protein. BDNF, yoga, meditation, stress relief, going to increase it. Fish oil, curcumin, spending time in nature will increase it. Cocoa, blueberries, EGCG, ginkgo, and bacopa, these cognitive boosting herbs. How are these herbs eliciting their benefits? They're increasing some of these gene expression of these compounds that are beneficial for us. So that will help that. And again, HIIT will increase BDNF. If you're stressed, inflamed, as you get older, you'll have lower BDNF production. Trauma associated with lower BDNF production. One of the cool things I found out about BDNF, this is the only thing where if you have a night of lack of sleep, you ever notice that sometimes if you have lack of sleep, if you get so little sleep, sometimes you're actually feeling better. It will drastically increase BDNF production. However, over the long term, if you're chronically sleep deprived, it's going to be low. But if you have like a night or two of sleep deprivation, you could actually see a boost in this BDNF, which I thought was interesting. All right, so some takeaways from this. Exercise is global, changes on the genome. Lots of different genes are implicated in exercise and fitness. I'll just name a couple. The ACTN3 gene can affect preference for power versus endurance. We could look at risk variance and collagen production to look at injury risk. And then PGC1 alpha activation has numerous different benefits in response to exercise, mitochondrial activation, and health in general. So some takeaways from this. And so you want to assess exercise and activity every visit with a patient. Try and set goals. This way, favorably move the needle. If there's setbacks, that's okay. Try to plan. I mean, what I try to plan with people is always move forward from wherever we're at then. So if they were doing great and they had a step back, how do we just take one step forward? If somebody is completely sedentary, usually I will start with incorporating stretching. I have a rule. If you are over the age of 30, essentially you have to spend more time per week doing stretching, myofascial release, massage, just anything that gets your body more pliable than just doing pure muscle training, because you're going to pull something or injure something, and that's not good. So get people to get their body to be a little bit more limber before they get into an exercise routine. I'm a big fan of exercise bands. And so, maybe if someone doesn't want to hit it hard really quickly, exercise bands that you're less likely to injure yourself. The dynamic tension that is happening from a band as it's increasing is a little bit more confusing to muscles. And so, I like that added aspect on training. I like actually mixing it up a little bit. I should note that I am a personal trainer, although it's been a while since I did personal training, but so I do have some background in that. And I do strength train and I do aerobic sports. Probably should have started with that. But anyway, I do have a good bit of experience with this, and I think it is very important within a clinical context. This needs to be addressed. Obviously, exercise has profound benefits on health, and not everyone knows how to do it. If you are not comfortable doing it, refer them to somebody that will. There are many different types of practitioners and personal trainers and people with knowledge in this that will help somebody get going. Also, if, again, from an early stage, if they're not exercising, I'll refer them to get a massage. Just get your muscles and your skin used to just being moved and stimulated in different ways that you're not typically used to. There's this physical aspect of ourselves that we need to address. What I found sometimes with people love supplementing, but they don't like the physical aspect. And the thing with supplements is they're kind of like greasing the wheels a little bit, but you still got to move the wheels. You still got to churn them. And so especially with a lot of health and disease states, there's low mitochondrial density, low mitochondrial activation. And you could give yourself the most favorable environment in the world to make more mitochondria. You can have a healthy diet, you can take supplements, your carnitine, your CoQ10. But are you actually giving your body the stimulus to make more mitochondria from a physical perspective? From a mental perspective as well, is your brain being challenged? So the opposite isn't good. I think if somebody is in a very metabolically poor state and they go and push yourself for exercise, they're going to feel like shit. And then they're going to not want to exercise again. or if they push their brain, they're going to feel like shit. So you want to do both. But that's what, at least what I've found in people that might seek to work with me is, yes, they like supplements and nutrition, but they're not necessarily doing this other mental, physical aspect. And so working their body, working their brain, getting it to work together. Exercising is almost arguably more of a brain workout than it is a muscle workout. But anyway, so those things need to be addressed. Pathways associated with exercise: glycogenolysis, breaking down glycogen, gluconeogenesis, fatty acid oxidation, the TCA cycle. You're going to see this upregulated in response to exercise. Some metabolites associated with exercise, so these amino acid breakdown products: alpha-ketogluteric acid, beta amino isobutyric acid, that BIBA one I was talking about, hyaluronic acid, anti-inflammatory for the brain, beta hydroxybutyrate, lactate, 12,3-dihome, anti-inflammatory metabolite, phosphatidylcholine, acylcarnitines, that's another big one you'll see a change, and then adenosine. Microbiome changes associated with exercise include increased short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria, increased Shannon index, alpha diversity, decreased bacteria containing lipopolysaccharide, increased beneficial microbes such as Akkermansia, Rosburia, and Prevotella. And again, exercising is a whole genome activation thing that's occurring. Many genes are upregulated, many genes are downregulated. We can inherit some risk variants in genes that will affect parameters of fitness and exercise and recovery. ACTN3 is associated with power and endurance preference. COL1A1 is a big one associated with injury risk. And PGC1 alpha, we could have risk variants in that impact our mitochondrial activation, and this will affect our response to exercise. All right, I work for Therio, and we have a Metabolomics test and a Microbiomics test. So if you would like to meet with me to discuss that, you can sign up through this link. Micah, if you're still there, we could put that in the chat, or I'll put it in the chat. And otherwise, thank you for attending. I will take any of your questions. Okay, there it is. So we got the link in the chat. So if anyone wants to meet with me to talk with me, let me know. All right. Someone asked me a recommendation for collagen supplement. As this is not a CME webinar, I can talk about different products. I like whole body collagen by Designs for Health. They have the Fortigel, the Vericel gel. They just have a different combination of collagen proteins. And so you want to have a broad spectrum collagen supplement. Just keep in mind, know that when you're having collagen supplements, like it's from bovine hide. So they literally take the hide, they process it, and then you get collagen out of it, or you get like cartilage, bones from rib cage. So, know that that is what you're getting. There's a lot of chemical processing of these things. Also, just one thing to keep in mind with just any proteins, there's lots of enzymatic processing that's happening. I know if anyone's in the Northeast, you probably have a Wegmans near you, which I love. Wegmans, I could get a nice big container of bone broth collagen, but they've removed all the liquid. So it's literally just this gelatinous mess. It's not a mess. It's delicious. I'll heat that up and I'll consume that as a collagen source. You could make stews for, you put the bones and with the joints in a stew, cook that for a while. So you could get it from your diet, and I do supplement with collagen protein. I just know that it is highly processed in order to get your collagen. Okay, I'm going to scroll up to the top here. So you have a question about sitting in ergonomics. Is it not the point of hiring a pro to come to the place of work? I give an assessment to set up things or get product recs. Are there certain organizations, sites online that would give them pointers to emphasize the importance of ergonomics for those sitting at a computer all day? There probably is organizations that will do that. I'm just not aware of them. I do think this is the problem. I'm standing right now. I've seen an explosion, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, of standing desks. Also have a really ridiculous chair. I'm not going to show everyone, but it goes in all these different shapes. So, and I'm a very fidgety person. There's something called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's basically the calories you burn from not exercising but moving a lot. And some people, they just do it more. And I'm a very fidgety person. I can't sit in a chair. I just have the natural inclination to move. I think for people like that, it's probably better because you're very attuned to move. But some people, they'll be like a stone, just sit stiff for hours, just locked in. And then they'll get up and it's trying to move their body for the first time. There's devices. There's something called the Sensate. I've never used it. I think it's on your neck or your back, but it senses your posture and your breathing as well. And it'll give you a reminder. And there's devices that remind you to get up and move. So there are ways to track this if somebody is not currently tracking it. But it is very important. You're decreasing injury risk. If you're sitting, your hamstrings are shortening. It's going to increase the risk for hamstring injury. Your glutes are being deactivated. This is why their butts will get weak. And so you actually have to kind of do these, that's why it's interesting. I've seen another explosion in the last several years of these like hip thrust exercises. They're important because there's lumbopelvic hip complex dysfunction from people sitting all the time. So we have to reverse those injuries. Working with a personal trainer can help you. A personal trainer, if you work with them, will identify what areas of your muscle are over versus underactivated and will help give you a treatment plan to prescribe movements that will help rebalance yourself. So I highly recommend working with somebody trained in that to identify specific for you being you or your patient with appropriate exercises. I wonder if exercise hormetics, nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals would have a similar outcome thinking about a high quadriplegic within a limits of physical course. There was a study that looked at exercise and then they compared those same individuals and put them in a sauna. They did a whole mRNA expression and it was very similar. And I thought that was so cool. Because to think that you could just sit in a sauna and have those same upregulation benefits. And honestly, that's what I'll do. If I do not have it in me to exercise, I will just sit in a sauna. So there are those benefits as well. There are studies too where they've literally had people think about it, think about moving, think about exercising, and they had people doing strength training versus people that just thought about it, and then they actually measured their strength, and it was similar compared to the people that didn't even do any strength training. So the mind is a very powerful thing. It's probably more powerful than we even know. But yes, so there are definitely things that we could do for that. This presentation has me wondering how daily intake of adaptogens may alter much of what was covered today. Among athletes and elite athletes, I would guess a large number of mechanisms, pathway, and activity production levels will show health shift. Absolutely. I mean, not just adaptogens, but foods. Well, food is information. And when we have information in our body, we're getting educated. School is in session. So that's going to change what our body is doing. Absolutely. This is the whole concept of precision medicine is that we have a unique genotype. And so what things are more specific for us? Some people have lower dopamine. Some people have lower serotonin receptor activation. There's another gene that I consider covering. It's called ADR2B, or excuse me, ADRB2, and it's an adrenergic receptor. And some people have overactivation of it. So they get excessively stimulated. Some people have underactivation of it. And so then you have to do things that will overactivate it. And that's a nice thing about herbs is they're I would say in this day and age, we know a lot about how they're affecting upregulation, downregulation of certain genes, especially adaptogens too. And so like rhodiola, for example, it's more dopaminergic. Some people really like that for exercise because that dopamine will just kind of help boost exercise. So yes, that is something that's definitely, and I'm a fan of just kind of rotating those things, to be honest, because I feel like you don't want to get too dependent on one certain type of adaptogen. Although there are some that I really like, that I are my personal go-tos. NR is nicotinamide riboside, and that's the precursor for NAD production. So for the type A person who are constantly pushing the envelope with exercise, what are key signs, symptoms, tools, wearables, methods for them to understand that they are overtraining? You beat me to it. Heart rate variability, that is a huge one. I'll just be honest. I've been tracking my heart rate variability. I've been pushing my exercise, and I'm watching it just go dropping. So I'm like, all right, I got to kind of back off a little bit. But you will see heart rate variability. You want your heart rate variability to be high. If it's low, that means that your heart can't vary that much between beats. It's not only associated with overtraining, it's associated with cardiovascular disease risk and stress and obesity. You don't want to do that. Heart rate monitor staying below their 220, their age. So that is important. And you're going to be shifting whether you're in glycolysis or whether you're in aerobic versus anaerobic. As a general rule, if you're going well above your anaerobic threshold, which means you're going to glycolysis instead of fatty acid oxidation, you're going to be predisposing yourself for more stress on your body. That's fine to do on occasion, but if you're constantly doing it and not recuperating enough, that's going to put you in the overtraining territory. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But yes, I am a big fan of biometrics. Not as big of a fan as some people like. Sometimes it's annoying to have like things strapped to me, measuring things all the time. But that's a good way. But I would say most simply sleep. If you find your sleep is getting really shitty and you're getting sick more often, you're in this overtraining territory and you got to back off a little bit. What is the name of your chair? Okay, so I will be honest. It's called the BU chair. And it has different wings and it has all these different like things. I should have put up an affiliate link or something. But anyway, it's called the BU chair. They had a Indiegogo campaign. I bought it like years ago, and then one day it arrived at my door, and I forgot they even bought the damn thing. But one of the wings did break, so I don't want to necessarily endorse it. But I like chairs that are atypical, especially for people that like to change how you're sitting. But if you look this thing up, you could like kneel on it, you can lay on it, but one wing down, one wing up. So there's all sorts of things. But anyway, that's the chair that I'm using. Do you have any comments on body health, perfect amino? Yeah, so as a general rule, I do like essential aminos. I think that is more important. When you look at studies, whether it's just like one individual amino acid or branching amino acids, in general, getting your essential amino acids as a supplement, and that is what I'll supplement with. So I do supplement with collagen protein and I'll supplement with essential amino acids. This is where testing for it. You can test your amino acids. And I think that's one way to make sure that your body's getting enough of it. And so, I would use that information to help tailor your amino acid needs. For therium tests, other tests with blood, urine in general, are there certain guidelines on don'ts prior to collection to ensure a most accurate result, avoiding certain exercises at least numbers of hours before condition? Yeah. I mean, if you exercise immediately, then did a test, it's going to change your metabolism. If you took a supplement, amino acids, and you did a test, it's going to change your results. In general, it's why we recommend our tests on a fast. So at least 8 hours within fasting, don't take any supplements just before. And usually those results are pretty reliable in terms of where somebody's metabolism is at. Sounds like a cool chair. Yeah, it is cool. It broke. One of the wings broke. But again, I'm not ruling out that I was just cumbersome with it and I was just leaning a bit too much. But I don't know. I would like to think. But I had a steel case chair before. I don't know if you guys know steel case. It's like one of the more expensive ones and supposed to be really good. I do like this chair better than that. It's just a shame that it broke. Yeah, I would agree with that. Michael says 24 hours no strenuous exercise. Yes. As I showed from that graph from a bout of exercise, the long-term genetic expression is going to be as long as 24 hours. So that's fine. But I mean, if you're used to the regular exercise, just don't be somebody who has never exercised. Then you have to do a huge CrossFit workout and then you do a metabolism test. It's going to skew the results. Usually when anyone's doing testing, I'm like, please continue doing what you're doing. We're trying to assess your current state. Don't do something drastically different because it's going to be captured. Okay. How much vitamin C do you recommend when taking collagen? I understand you need to take vitamin C with collagen. I'm a really big fan of vitamin C. If you take vitamin C, usually within a couple hours, it's metabolized. So I like several grams a day spread out throughout the day. So 2 to 3 grams a day, not just for collagen production, but for many different things. But yeah, so I do recommend that. Electrolyte timing around exercise. That's interesting because there are some studies that say if you go into mild dehydration around a workout, there's some benefits there. I kind of rather not risk it because the dehydration is going to be increasing your risk of having like a muscle pull. So I would say all around exercise. Now, you don't want to be in fluid overload while you're exercising because that could just be not good and uncomfortable. Before I exercise, I have taken electrolytes. In my water, I just have electrolytes. So I use something called 40,000 volts by Trace Minerals Research. Before I was using that product, I was actually getting cramps. And after I started using it in my water, I started getting no cramps. So I'll have some electrolytes before and I will have electrolytes during. I guess technically I'm having electrolytes all the time. I'm just, the water I consume has electrolytes in it. And when I say electrolytes, fluoride is a big one, potassium is a big one, magnesium, calcium, and then Trace Minerals Research. There's just some like small amounts of other things like lithium in there, which is important. All right. Thank you so much, Michael. Okay, so if any other questions, otherwise, I hope to see some of you in a call with me at some point. Otherwise, thank you for attending today's webinar and get at it. We got a new year. If you're not currently in an exercise routine, just start doing something small. It doesn't take too much. If you are uncomfortable going to a gym, that's totally fine. There are many things you could do in your own home. You could get yourself a pack of bands. There's tubes and there's regular bands. They're like $7 each. It doesn't cost much. You don't need that much space to do them. And there's many different resources online to get started. And this is the information I share with my patients as well. So it's just a matter of getting into a routine. And once you establish a routine, it's going to be easier. But anyway, all right, everyone. Thank you so much for attending and stay tuned for the next webinar. Happy New Year.